Hi, Finn and Liam. It's Aunt Claire. Uh, let's see, we're about to start on Chapter 5 of The Adventures of Grandfather Frog. And when last we left Grandfather Frog, he was being watched very, very carefully by Longlegs the Heron, who was standing, if you recall, on one leg with one leg up, pretending to be, being very, very still so that Grandfather Frog wouldn't see him. But of course, Grandfather Frog knew he was there the whole time. So we'll see what happens next. But first, as I said, I would promise you a story about my dad, who was also known as Grandfather Frog. And since we've met the character Jerry Muskrat, I'll tell you a story about my dad and Muskrat. Um, when we lived in Wilmington, Delaware, Wilmington was the biggest city in the state of Delaware. And downstate in Delaware, there was a lot of marshlands and wetlands, and where Muskrat lived. So I happened to be in downtown Wilmington, in a kind of a slightly poor section of the city. And I said to Dad, "Hey, Dad, I saw the weirdest thing today. There was a guy with a station wagon, and in the back of the station wagon, he had hung up hooks in the ceiling of the station wagon, and he had muskrats tied by their tails to the hooks, and he was offering them for sale." And Dad said, "Really? Where was this?" So the next thing you know, Dad comes home with, some muskrat that he had bought from the guy who sold them in the back of his station wagon. And my mom, your great grandmother, was very upset, of course, whenever Dad would bring home questionable foodstuffs. Mom always got a little bit perturbed. And she even told me, if your father is serving something for dinner, because by that point he had retired from business, and my mom was writing full time, so Dad took over all the cooking chores. And my mom said, if he ever serves you something for dinner and he's a little bit evasive about what exactly is in the dish, go to the trash can and check and see if there is a meat wrapper from the grocery store. And if there's no meat wrapper from the grocery store, then goodness knows what the animal is that he's serving you, and maybe you want to reconsider eating it. So that's my dad and muskrats. And now chapter 5, which is entitled Grandfather Frog Jumps Just in Time. Back and forth over the green meadows sailed Whitetail the marsh hawk. Like Longlegs the blue heron, he was hungry. His sharp eyes peered down among the grasses, looking for something to eat. But some good fairy seemed to have warned the very little people who lived there that Whitetail was out hunting. Perhaps it was one of old Mother West Wind's children, the Merry Little Breezes. You know they are always flitting about, trying to do someone a good turn. They love to dance and romp and play from dawn to dusk the livelong day, but more than this they love to find a chance to do some favor kind. Anyway, little Mr. Greensnake seemed to know that Whitetail was out hunting and managed to keep out of sight. Danny Meadow Mouse wasn't to be found. Only a few foolish grasshoppers rewarded his patient search, and these only served to make him feel hungrier than ever. But old Whitetail has a great deal of persistence, and in spite of his bad luck, he kept at his hunting, back and forth, until he had been all over the green meadows. At last he made up his mind that he was wasting his time there. "I'll just have a look over at the Smiling Pool, and if there is nothing there, I'll take a turn or two along the big river," thought he, and straightway started for the Smiling Pool. Long before he reached it, his keen eyes saw Longlegs the blue heron standing motionless on the edge of it, and he knew by the looks of Longlegs that he was watching something which he hoped to catch. "If it's a fish," thought Whitetail. "It will do me no good, for I am no fisherman. But if it's a frog, oh, well, frogs are not as good eating as fat meadow mice, but they are very filling." With that, he hurried a little faster, and then he saw what Longlegs was watching so intently. It was, as you know, Grandfather Frog sitting on his big green lily pad. Old Whitetail gave a great sigh of satisfaction. Grandfather Frog certainly would be very filling indeed. Now, Longlegs the Blue Heron was so intently watching Grandfather Frog that he saw nothing else. And Grandfather Frog was so busy watching Longlegs that he quite forgot that there might be other dangers. Besides, his back was towards old Whitetail. Of course, Whitetail saw this, and it almost made him chuckle aloud. Ever so many times he had tried to catch Grandfather Frog, but always Grandfather Frog had seen him long before he could get near him. Now, with all his keen sight, old Whitetail had failed to see someone else who was sitting right in plain sight. He had failed because his mind was so full of Grandfather Frog and Longlegs that he forgot to look around, as he usually does. Just skimming the tops of the bulrushes, he sailed swiftly out over the green pool, the Smiling Pool, and reached down with his great cruel claws to clutch Grandfather Frog, who sat there pretending to be asleep, but all the time watching Longlegs, and deep down inside chuckling to think how he was fooling Longlegs. Slap! That was the tail of Jerry Muskrat hitting the water. Grandfather Frog knew what that meant. Danger! He didn't know what the danger was, and he didn't wait to find out. There would be time enough for that later. When Jerry Muskrat slapped the water with his tail that way, danger was very near indeed. With a frightened chug-a-rum, Grandfather Frog dived headfirst into the Smiling Pool, and so close was old Whitetail that the water was splashed right in his face. He clutched frantically with his great claws, but all he got was a piece of the big green lily pad on which Grandfather Frog had been sitting. And of course, this was of no use for an empty stomach. With a scream of disappointment and anger, he whirled in the air and made straight for Jerry Muskrat, but Jerry just laughed in the most provoking way and ducked underwater. Chapter 6. Longlegs and Whitetail Quarrel. "You did!" "I didn't!" "I didn't!" "You did!" Such a terrible fuss when Grandfather hid. You see, Longlegs the Blue Heron had stood very patiently on one foot all the long morning, waiting for Grandfather Frog to go to sleep on his big green lily pad. He had felt sure he was to have Grandfather Frog for his breakfast and lunch, for he had had no breakfast, and it was now lunchtime. He was so hungry that it seemed to him that the sides of his stomach certainly would fall in because there was nothing to hold them up. And then, without any warning at all, old Whitetail the Marsh Hawk had glided out across the Smiling Pool with his great claws stretched out to clutch Grandfather Frog, and Grandfather Frog had dived into the Smiling Pool with a great splash just in the very nick of time. And here's a picture of Whitetail the Marsh Hawk stretching out his great claws. Now, is there anything in the world so hard on the temper as to lose a good meal when you are very, very, very hungry? Of course, Longlegs didn't really have that good meal, but he had thought that he was surely going to have it. So when Grandfather Frog splashed into the Smiling Pool, of course Longlegs lost his temper altogether. His yellow eyes seemed to grow even more yellow. "You robber! You thief!" he screamed harshly at old Whitetail. Now, old Whitetail was just as hungry as Longlegs, and he had come even nearer to catching Grandfather Frog. He is even quicker tempered than Longlegs. He had whirled like a flash on Jerry Muskrat, but Jerry had just laughed in the most provoking manner and ducked underwater. This had made old Whitetail angrier than ever, and then to be called bad names, robber and thief. Why, it was more than any self-respecting hawk could stand. Yes, sir, it certainly was. He fairly shook with rage as he turned in the air once more and made straight for Longlegs the blue heron. "I'm no more robber and thief than you are," he shrieked. "You frightened away my frog," screamed Longlegs. "I didn't." "You did." "I didn't. It wasn't your frog, it was mine." "Chug-a-rum," said Grandfather Frog to Jerry Muskrat as they peeped out from under some lily pads. I didn't know I belonged to anybody. I really didn't. Did you?" "No," replied Jerry, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he watched Longlegs and Whitetail. "It's news to me." "You're too lazy to hunt like honest people," taunted old Whitetail as he wheeled around Longlegs, watching for a chance to strike with his great cruel claws. "I'm too honest to take the food out of other people's mouths," retorted Longlegs, dancing around so as to always face Whitetail, one of his great broad wings held in front of him like a shield, and his long, strong bill ready to strike. Every feather on Whitetail's head was standing erect with rage, and he looked very fierce and terrible. At last he saw a chance, or thought he did, and shot down, but all he got was a feather from that great wing which Longlegs kept in front of him, and before he could get away, that long bill had struck him twice, so that he screamed with pain. So they fought and fought till the ground was covered with feathers, and they were too tired to fight any longer. Then, slowly and painfully, old Whitetail flew away over the green meadows, and with torn and ragged wings, Longlegs flew heavily down the Laughing Brook towards the big river, and both were sore and stiff and still hungry. Dear me, what a terrible thing, and how useless anger is," said Grandfather Frog as he climbed back on his big green lily pad in the warm sunshine. Okay, so we'll stop there. And the next chapter is chapter 7, Grandfather Frog's big mouth gets him in trouble. My big mouth gets me in trouble sometimes, too. It's something I have to work on more. Well, boys, it was very nice reading to you tonight. I'll be doing it again tomorrow. I'm going to get back on a more regular schedule. I had a great big math test to take on Monday. It was my final exam for the semester, which means it was a really, really big test that it asked all kinds of questions throughout the whole semester. So I had to remember all kinds of stuff, some of which I had forgotten a little bit. So it was a big test, and that's why I was really busy this weekend and didn't record any chapters. But I will start recording chapters on a daily basis again tomorrow. Love you, boys. Bye.